Here we go. Okay, welcome to our first session of the Youth Compensation Summit. This session is about labor law and contracting. My name is Katie Scott. I am the program director at the National Homelessness Law Center for our youth homelessness work, and I will pass it to my fellow presenter, Sophie, to introduce herself.
Thanks, Katie, and so excited to be here, and so nice to see some names that are kind of popping up. So, thank you all for joining. My name is Sophie. I'm a youth consultant as well as just for economic mobility and child welfare advocate. And I'm really excited to be here.
Excellent. Let's get going. And please also put in the chat if for some reason you can't hear us or something is going wrong on the tech side, just let us know so we can fix it. Sophie, why don't you walk us through our agenda for today?
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about just the background and the framing of this work, and then kind of talking about labor law, more on the Katie side on that for that, and then contracting and administration of payments. So we're gonna cover all these things, and they're dense. So just ask questions. We're gonna stop, and also we want to be curious and create a space of learning, an opportunity to kind of bounce off each other. I'll pass it to you, Katie.
Amazing. Thanks, Sophie. So, the background, I always say the origin story of this is it's sort of twofold. One, I was told that I needed to get a W-9 form to give out a $50 gift card when I first started at my job at the National Homelessness Law Center. And let me tell you, I was floored. I still actually disagree a bit with this policy that we have. We kind of have an overall policy that if we're ever paying out anything that's of cash value, we have to request a W-9 form. I think that's a little complicated because, if we knew that, for instance, we were going to pay out that particular person $400, $600 a year, where there might be some tax thresholds coming into play, then maybe I think, it would be required, but it is a policy of our organization. So once that kind of floored me, I realized I needed to look into this more, and that happened to coincide with the Way Home America's Youth Compensation Town Halls in 2022. From those halls, I realized that I really wanted a space to be able to talk to others about these issues, figure out how to do it better at our organization, hear the issues that young people were having with compensation, especially when it came to sort of the legal and administrative side of things. And so we formed what was called the Youth Compensation Workgroup. We are now calling ourselves the Youth Economic Empowerment Collective, to kind of reflect a broader mission of economic empowerment. And one of our first projects of that group was the creation of the Youth Compensation Legal Guide. And this is something that I just encourage anyone who is, working with young people and paying them in whatever way it is, small, medium, or large amounts of payments. I encourage young people to read it, to understand your rights when it comes to getting paid, no matter what your, status is, employee, independent contractor, or participant. And we'll talk about those definitions in a minute. And I encourage folks that maybe, work in the administration of these organizations, like operations folks and finance folks, because what it also highlights, not only does it highlight all the legal requirements, it also talks a little bit about sort of the framing that we're going to go into in a minute, um, and just the understanding of like what it really would mean to center youth in these conversations and policies and within the frames of the law.
Thanks, Katie. And to kind of start out, we wanted to understand what are some barriers that exist in compensating young people. And I see that the chat is kind of fired up. We love to hear your perspective and the challenges that you're facing in the chat. And maybe we'll have like one or two people come off mute and talk.
So I know some folks are throwing the link to the legal guide. There is like a regular Google Docs version and a PDF version. And I think we are just hoping that people will, yeah, throw in their ideas about what barriers exist to compensating young people in your experience. Or as a young person, what barriers have you faced in being compensated? For your work? For your work?
Okay, so in the chat right now, we have Carlos saying, right now, my organization is pushing back against paying youth via check. They only want to do gift cards. Meredith said, limitations that prevent offering multiple and flexible methods of payment. Uh, Michelle, getting approval from my organization to allow electronic payment transfers with Cash App, Venmo. Let's see. Tessa, confusion around stipend versus contract versus W-2. Felicia says young people prefer Cash App, but there's barriers to linking our org business account, which has left us reimbursing staff for replenishing the account. I can pause there if you want to add anything, Katie or Sophie.
I'm like nodding my head off because I do pay via the apps and just have to get reimbursed for the most part. We do have a work PayPal account, but we've yet to figure out a way to get a work Cash App especially.
And I wanted to add, seeing Carlos chat, I started my advocacy with the Carlos, and that was like 6 years ago, and it's crazy that we still use gift cards. And that we're still having this conversation, that we're not actually moving with the time that we're in, and also just meeting the need of young people. So it's just kind of shocking to me to read some of these things because I feel like there's been so much work and progress, as well as just the limitation of the bureaucracy that we create as admins. So I think that's also something to remember. Like we create some of these, not maybe not us, but some of the leadership within the space. So how do we challenge those leaders to kind of think outside the box, and how do we have allies who are thinking differently partner with us? That's something that was coming to mind reading these.
And just we're getting so many other great comments in the chat, so please, folks, read them. But just to keep us on time, might need to move us along to our framing, and so we can get to the meat of the presentation.
Yeah. And to like frame this conversation then today, we wanted to we let me slow down. Um, just reading this, I think we need to respect young people as co-designers of youth homelessness system and respect their role and skills through equitable labor law and practices, meaning really people say it's a gift for young people to work with us. People say all these things, but it's also a job. And we need to understand that, and we need to actually respect that. That when we're coming into, I think, to the comment about stipend to contract to honor, like we don't do that with other employees that we are hiring, or we don't, companies are not having those conversations. So how do we have those conversations with the young people and have their respect and the agency and the dignity that we can extend? Um, and it's just a right, according to Katie's law. I'm just joking. According to the law.
Oh, sometimes I wish it was Katie's law, but alas, we're stuck with some of the real laws. Um, and yeah, just to kind of build on that, I mean, I think for us in this work, the goal is not just to have more young people working with youth homelessness organizations. Like, absolutely, we need folks with lived experience leading this work and working and doing this work. But I think ultimately the goal is for young people to have what they need to thrive and including what they need to grow beyond working with youth homelessness systems or any systems. Like this is the vision. Part of why I think we changed the name of our group was to have this vision of moving beyond just youth who experience homelessness working within those same systems, but really having the tools they need to move beyond that. Okay, let's dive into the law. Um, so I always say labor law, first things first. This is 100% your first stop, your first place where you are going to want to think about if you are considering engaging youth in any kind of paid work with your organization, or if you are a young person engaging in that work. I will launch this poll and let Sophie walk us through it. Oh, it looks like people have already participated. Wow, it must have been like launched already. This is
As soon
great.
as people logged in, it asks you. So
Uh,
Okay. Uh,
Katie, I'm not able to see it.
okay, interesting.
Yeah.
All right, once I end the poll, then I think you'll be able to see it. All right, so everyone, participants, last chance. you can answer the poll of what is your familiarity with labor law and contracting, whether you're new to the conversation, you know some things, or you know a lot. Those are the three options, and
And if
we
you
will
can't see it,
close.
you select the like little ellipses where it says more, and then there should be quizzes and polls, and it should pop up with it if you can't see it.
Fabulous. Thank you, Pixie. I'm sitting here being like, this is why my children call me Unc, because I do not know. I do not have a natural, I think, affinity for figuring out um, technology. But here we are. I'm going to end the poll so we have time to move on. So the poll is ended and I'm sharing the results. Can folks see it now? Okay. So it looks like we've got about half and half new to the conversation and know some things. And I'm excited about the two people that said they know a lot. So you can jump in if there's anything that we're missing that you think is important. Okay. Anything else, Sophie, on the
No, that's
poll?
all.
Okay. Fabulous. So, labor law definitions. This is really, if you understand these definitions, you're like halfway there. So, the way we've kind of divided it up is into participant, independent contractor, and employee. One thing I will tell you is that employee has a legal definition, both in, labor law, lots of state-based law, um, independent contractor similarly, like most states have their own test as to whether someone is an independent contractor or an employee. There's also tax laws that have to do with the difference between independent contractors and employees that can sometimes be a little bit different than labor laws. But then there's sort of this other category that isn't really defined anywhere, that for our purposes, we're calling participant, and I'll go into like a little more about that. But it's sort of a situation where someone receives income in exchange for something, but maybe there's not like an ongoing relationship, or there's not a contract, or it doesn't rise to the level of any of these tests for determining who's an independent contractor or an employee. But it's important to track this income because for tax purposes, like any income you receive in exchange for something else, that could be taxable income, right? So it's important to sort of understand that, and for young people to understand that as they are receiving income from your organization. So I would define participant as someone who receives a stipend, gift card, or incentive for attending a meeting, focus group, or training with your organization. I think Sophie mentioned like honorarium a little earlier today. Like an honorarium is sometimes a similar thing here, like where an organization might offer a fee for folks to speak at a particular event. But it's really more about a one-time kind of thing or something that's not happening like on a regular or ongoing basis. Um, an independent contractor, like I said, is a very specific legal category. An independent contractor is someone with a specialized skill that is in the business of providing services to others based on that skill. And there's a federal test, and most states have a test. And we'll go into what the general gist of that test is on the next slide. Um, An example of this is like, I don't know how to design web pages. So when my organization wanted to design a new web page, I had to go out and find a contractor to help us with the web design. Like I provided the content, they provided the design. That, is squarely within the realm of independent contractor, especially because my organization isn't in the business of creating websites. Um, okay. And then an employee is someone who provides services for an organization in exchange for wages, but the organization, the employer, ultimately controls what will be done and how it will be done. This is usually an at-will relationship, meaning the employee can be fired at any time for any reason, or the employee can quit at any time for any reason. However, there can be employment relationships that are governed by a contract. And that's like most common, for instance, with, say, unionized workers. So, like, there might be a situation like in an employment contract where there's a union that essentially says what has to happen before someone could be fired or states the specific reasons, like someone can only be fired for cause. Um, so that's employee. Now, why is this important? It can be important from an equity lens, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But when it really comes down to it, there are also legal consequences for misclassifying an employee as an independent contractor, paying back taxes, paying fines, being liable, for lawsuits by people who are misclassified. Microsoft is a big example of this. For a long time, they were trying to get away with like having people do their software development as independent contractors, but like Microsoft is basically a software development company. So like that does not make any sense, as we'll talk about on the next slide. I'll pause here in case anyone has any questions about definitions. Okay. So what this looks like for our purposes here today is if the young person cannot complete the project without supervision from a staff person at your organization, or if staff are dictating when and how the young person completes the work, or if the young person is doing work that you otherwise engage employees to do, these are all signs that the relationship might legally be an employment relationship rather than a contracting one. Um, like I said, and there's a link on the previous slide, certain states like California has something like a 20-part test that, you can look at to determine employee versus independent contractor. But when we look at, across all the states, what is sort of the general rules that you can really think about here? These three things tend to come up most frequently and is where organizations tend to get in trouble if they don't follow them. Um, so I'll pause here in case anyone has questions about this slide as well. Um, I felt like there was something else I wanted to mention here, but hopefully I'll remember it once we get to the next slide. Um, oh, I went too far. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. I think at this point I was going to pass it to Sophie in case there were if Sophie had anything I was forgetting.
No, I don't have anything.
Okay.
There's a
Wonderful.
question in the
Oh,
chat though.
yes. Perfect. And actually, that was similar to what I was hoping to clarify. So, cannot complete without supervision. So, basically, um, it's definitely possible. Like, it is possible for an employee at an organization and an independent contractor to like work together in some way, right? This isn't to say that like if you are engaging someone as an independent contractor, you could never like do any co-work with them, or you couldn't kind of split up different parts of the project. Like I said, for the website design, for instance, like we had weekly meetings with our website contractor. They gave us suggestions for the content, or said like, why don't you word it this way? Um, for the independent for the website folks, they would come back to us with a design and we'd be like, no, that's exactly not what we want. We want it to be more like this. And then they would go and do it. So the difference there is that while we were collaborating, like I was not dictating sort of when and how they could do that work that we were collaborating on together. They didn't need my help to figure out how to create that web page to then put the content that we collaborated on, right? They already came and knew how to do that. So I think what often happens, like paid internships is like a great idea, like is a great example. Paid internships actually really should be like more of an employment relationship because if someone's interning, like they need supervision and mentoring and training. Generally, it's like they're coming in to probably learn or do something that you normally do at your organization, right? So a paid internship would really be more of an employee situation. Um, I think we're probably what people are probably thinking, like in the sort of youth action board context, like if you are contracting with your youth action board members, um, really the only appropriate way to do that would be if, you're engaging the youth action board members to do projects that they essentially are able to do with minimal supervision from staff. If you want to train your youth action board members, it's not to say that you couldn't compensate them for that training time or learning time. Like you could provide a stipend or something like that. You could pay them essentially as a participant, but it would not be appropriate to engage them as an independent contractor to like train them how to do the work at your organization, if that makes any sense. Like that would have to be either some kind of an agreement that they're going to get a stipend in exchange for a training, or you can engage them as an employee and then they can be trained, you know, by you or throughout the course of their work on your project. I see sort of a follow-up to that. That's what I don't understand. As an employee, supervision from other staff while doing an independent project sounds strange to me. That might be a commentary on like the feeling of as an employee, are we really getting are we really getting training and the mentorship that we need within our organizations? The answer is probably no. And also, of course, as an employee, you can often work without supervision depending on your level of experience, right? Um, the test is really more about whether someone can appropriately be considered an independent contractor. With an employee, you're not really worried so much about these three um, pieces of the test. This is really about if you are trying to engage an independent contractor and they can't meet sort of these three bullets, then a court or a state could find that that person should have been engaged as an employee instead.
And
All
Katie,
right.
something I
Yes.
wanted to add too, the way that you identify, I think it's also important to let the young people know. Because when it comes to taxes, those are
Yes.
questions that come up when you get your 1099s, and it's so confusing. And I think a lot of people are confused. Okay, like if you're a contractor, then you can maybe, take off other things, expenses. But you don't know that because maybe you're a part-time employee, define that. So I think it's also understanding what do young people have to do with the tax laws too, and figuring out and being transparent with young people, whatever definition you're using, they also know what the consequences are or what the things that they have to know about those different definitions.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I was going to say that is it's probably becoming clear like independent contractor law doesn't really contemplate what we're often doing in this youth homelessness system. Independent contractor law is assuming that you're engaging someone who is like in the business of providing a certain service to an organization, right? And so that person who's in the business, you would expect that they would normally know about taxes and licensing and all the things that they might need to know to run a business. But we know that that's not the reality of what we're often doing in our space, right? So it means that we need to think about that and shift and be transparent. We'll move on to contracting. I did see the thing about being a paid volunteer in the chat. I have to chuckle. It is appropriate occasionally, like for volunteers to receive stipends and expense in exchange for like expenses if they're volunteering and like you want to reimburse them for expenses. There's really not a such thing legally as a paid volunteer though. And especially like if you're an employee of an organization, you do not want to get into a situation where you're also like volunteering for that organization because that really can create some difficult legal conundrums, and the organization really should not be allowing that. Okay, I'm going to move on to contracting so we have time. We say never take it or leave it, and we'll explain that later. Um, but I think, and Sophie, just jump in if I'm like bowling over some of your slides, but I think your slides are in a minute here. Um, Basically, the definition of making a legal contract is that both parties must give or promise something to the other, such as money or work, and both parties must freely agree to the terms. We know that in practice, like think about if you sign your lease, do I freely agree to those terms? I need a place to live, and my landlord has more power than me. So it's a little tricky there. And similarly, I think it's especially tricky, and there's lots of landmines and things to be aware of if you are contracting in a situation where there is an imbalance of power. Um, And what we're going to talk about will help avoid some of that. So, our main, so basically, assuming that you've done your labor law analysis and that you know that you're going to engage with someone in a contractual way and that that is appropriate to do so, when you are creating that contract, these are the tips that we recommend. So, one really important thing, use plain language. Avoid any fancy legal words. If you mean that once paperwork is received, payments will be made in 30 days, just say that. If you mean that something is due on a certain date, and if it can't be completed by that date, and if then the person should contact you to like work out a new date, just say that. You don't have to say wherefore the contractor, in light of consideration of the agreement that we're coming to, blah blah blah. You don't have to say that. You can just say exactly what you mean in the simplest way. Unfortunately, a lot of sample contracts are not in plain language. In the Youth Compensation Legal Guide, we do link to an article that gives you tips for how to make your contracts plain language. You can just take a legalese contract and delete all the extra words. Like that is okay too. If you have a sample that doesn't look good, just pare it down to be the simplest, plainest language as you can. And in that plain language, please make sure it is extremely clear about the payment details and terms. So you want to say what the amount is that the person will be paid. Um, and is it like a lump sum per month? Is it based on hours? Do they need to invoice for those hours? Is there a maximum amount that they can bill? What is the schedule? Is it going to come out at the same time as like paychecks every other week? Is it paid on a monthly basis? Is it paid upon receipt of invoice or other kinds of paperwork? Make that extremely clear in the contract. Also, make the method and mechanics of payment. So, like if an app payment is available, make sure that that's clear. If direct deposit is available, make sure that that's clear and that you have the information you need and you're clear about the information you need to make that payment. And then this one is really important, and I am guilty of failing to do this in my early contracts at the law center. Make sure the person you are contracting with knows who to reach out for if they have questions about the payment process. Because while I handle some of it at our organization, it ultimately goes to our operations director who handles our finances. So making sure that the person you are contracting with knows how to contact that person in case of issues is really important. We're going to talk about this a lot at a session later, but intellectual property, basically anything created out of the contract. So if, you're contracting with a young person to create a webinar or a visual or a video, who owns that, right? Like, who is the person that has the right to use that work that's created by the contract? Uh, it can just be important. One way to make that really clear is to just address it directly in the contract, right? Like, who owns it, how it can be used, how people get credit for their work, um, and how long that, use lasts, essentially. Like, can they use it forever? Can they only use it for a certain amount of time? Uh, Include conflict resolution terms. If you guys come to a disagreement about the contract or a term of the contract, how will that conflict be resolved? A lot of, the legalese contracts say like arbitration in the state of New York or something. Like that is probably not something that's accessible or affordable even to your organization, let alone a young person. Think creatively about how you can actually have reasonable conflict resolution terms to resolve the conflict. And then finally, make the duration clear. Is this a renewable contract? Does it end at a certain time? Is it for 1 month? Is it for 6 months? Just make it clear so that folks know. And then one thing I don't have on here, but it kind of could be in the conflict resolution terms, but like, how can you terminate the contract? Like, let's say in the course of the contract, one party needs to terminate for whatever reason. Organization runs out of money, or young person can't do it, they have to move, something is going on. Um, have some kind of reasonable termination provision in there, whether it's in 30 days, like notify in writing and it terminates in 30 days, or, some other kind of reasonable way to terminate or negotiate when things go wrong. Okay, I'm
Okay,
going to
adding
pause
to that,
here.
um,
Yeah.
I think something also to be mindful, I know I've experience where like write your own contract and I'm like, okay. Um, which is exciting but also daunting at the same time. So how do we equip the young people to have examples of these contracts that with these good practices too is really important. If you are asking an individual to write their own contract.
Yeah, I think this is something that we're not doing a great, like, I think this needs to be created, honestly. I, for a while, have thought about, like, can we create a folder, that's accessible to the public as a part of the youth compensation work that we do that just has, like, some example contracts. I've been a little timid to use our law center one as the example because I wanted to like test it out and make sure it was like actually working for people. I think it's pretty reasonable. It's pretty plain language. It's pretty simple, but it hits most of the main points. So maybe we'll start with, and we can share after, with the webinar registrants, we can start a folder of, plain language contracts that people can draw from. Um, I will note for folks who aren't able to come to the intellectual property presentation later, you will get a link to all of those materials. In those materials, there's also a couple links to like contracts and contract clauses that you can use, especially for like the intellectual property types of provisions. But yeah, I found this is one thing I found it hard to find good resources for this. So maybe it's just we got to create it. Like create it from scratch.
We're hearing outside of AI in the chat.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes, it's so true. I did see one question about a contractor charter. A charter, I think, is more about like how a group functions versus how two individuals create like a working relationship together. Um, I would say that probably if you're trying to figure out what the working relationship is, that a contract is appropriate because that kind of keeps it within this area of law that has some nice protections, would make it very clear. Like if you brought to the court a charter for how you're working with someone, they might think like, huh, does this apply to contract law? Like, was there a meeting of the minds as far as what we've agreed to do for each other? So I think it makes sense to use a contract in that situation. And yes, all the materials will be provided to all registrants. I don't know, Sophie, do you want to go through this slide
Yeah, I think the
to
biggest
wrap us
thing
up?
you kind of said most of it is like don't have a policy where it's take it or leave it. I think if we're talking about contract, allow the individual to negotiate. Even if you're gonna say no, then be transparent. Like I have no room for negotiation. But create space for also learning opportunity to negotiate in a really safe space. And I think it's just there's so many contracts or projects where young people are not given the opportunity or the space to actually say, "Oh, this is why I should get paid this much, and this is the reason, this is the livable wage." And so I think don't have a take it or leave it policy when it comes to this work. Allow the young people to learn in a safe space too, to negotiate and to advocate for themselves too. And then kind of to Katie's point, and she kind of talked about um, like just be clear who's responsible for payments, who's the person, because it's never the same person that you're contracting with. It's always a new email that pops up, and then like make sure that everything that is needed for the contract to complete the project or task covered by the contractor. So that looks like transportation, or if it's supplies, or you're doing a focus group, like a listening session, so maybe it's food. Like I think thinking through these, like what are the expenses? Maybe if this is the first time and an individual's doing it, how do we kind of think and actually lend a hand and like what are some expenses that come up? And can we cover that outside of your own stipend that you might get?
Amazing. And that's a project of the work group that's coming up soon is we're going to add some information about working with youth with disabilities as contractors, particularly. And one thing is that, yeah, as a young person and as an organization working with a young person, make sure that if there is a need for accommodations, cover that in the contract. Because for independent contractors, there's not as many protections as there are for employees, for folks with disabilities. So you really want to try to cover it in that contract if possible. Okay, amazing. And I think just like one more thing to Sophie's point, and as we kind of move into the next section, the like your budget is what it is. Like if you're at an organization, if you're running a project, like your budget is what it is. We're not saying that you have to like negotiate outside of your budget, but transparency about the budget, transparency about the limitations, that gives the young person the knowledge of how they can negotiate within that, right? And thinking of, yeah, creative ways that you can negotiate and make this something, an opportunity that will help for future work opportunities, right? Whether it comes to intellectual property or giving credit where credit's due for the work that's done, being able to put it on a resume, things like that. Okay, administration of payments, harder than you think. I don't know, Sophie, do you want to start us off here?
Yeah, I could start. Really, what kind of setting the ground. Organization often say that they value youth voice, but when a payment system is slow and clear, really what we're trying to say is that yes, we value voice, we want to work with young people, but then when it comes to it, sometimes the practice and the action doesn't always follow, and we're not held accountable to the young people that we're working with. If that's slow payment, I was working with a young person and the payment was like almost 2 months late, and that young person needed the payment. And they were like, "Oh, I'm out of town." And then HR tried to work with HR. HR needed all these documents, and they didn't, this young person didn't have a computer. And so it was just, I'll talk about accessibility and actually meeting the need of the young person. So what we're trying to say is like, if we're going to say we value youth voice and we're going to be equitable in the way that we're working with them, that means also being timely and respecting the needs that they're asking for.
So well said. And I think like, yeah, consult youth on your policies. Like if you can convince your administrative and operational staff, which Sophie knows occasionally my struggles there, but like as much as possible, consult youth before you make these policies or be open. Like if we're telling youth, come into this space where you're going to be able to change, your city, your state, your country, but then you can't even change our organization, that just rings so false to me. So like let's be open to consulting youth on policies and figuring out how we can change our little worlds that we have power over. The types of payments, like really you have to think through, I think, like what's going to be actually achievable for your organization. Like our organization has one finance person. So like we have a limited amount of flexibility in how many payments we can do per year, how much we can engage young people. So you really just need to think about, yeah, like what makes sense for the type of work we're trying to do, the type of payments we need, what their labor classification is, and what do we have capacity for as an organization. And really, again, transparency, being upfront, doing what you say you're going to do. Sophie, did you want to jump in on this paperwork one?
Yeah, and also to add to the last thing, I think don't be afraid to break the rules. I know we're talking about the law in this, but I think there's so many needs. Like there are always flexible bounds. Like if a young person can't get a check, how do you also figure out, okay, what are ways that they can get a check? Because they might not have a place to get a check. Um, and so they still did the work. So I think being able to be flexible, and none of us are the same people. We're all individualized. And so how do we also, when it comes to payment and the methods, we make these rules. We are the policy holder, and so how do we also challenge that policy internally that is being challenged, like being upheld, just because we can. So I just wanted to mention that because I think that is we are our own barriers a lot of times when it comes to, oh, I can't pay through this way or this method or that method. Paperwork requirement, I think for me, at least my experience, for example, I did some work with Katie and Kelly from the American Bar Association, and I asked for a reimbursement for transportation, and I was like, you need a W-9. I was like, but this is my money I spent. I just need a reimbursement. Um, and it was just such a struggle. And I'm like, why do I need a W-9 when it's not actually something, it's not like a service I provided, it's just something I did to support. And so I feel like there's so many like things like that where you need a W-9, talk about the idea where this work began is that you need a W-9 if you breathe the work. So I think understanding and being able to talk about the flexibility of the mind and challenging these systems that we are operating within is really important when it comes to why are we requiring paperwork for certain people, certain communities? And I have a lot of young people who don't have computers who can't do these like paperworks too you're requiring. So then they have to give somebody else their social security number so that somebody else can fill it out. That's also not right because their privacy is their right, but that's already being invaded. So I think being really understanding of who you're working with and what are their needs and what are the barriers to meet the paperwork or any other requirements you have and how do you meet them? It doesn't mean they don't qualify for the work. I want to be really clear about that. It's a matter of like meeting them where they're at.
Amazing. And I know we're basically at time, but I am going to just take one more minute to kind of address two questions I saw in the chat. One was from Zaquana about what if admins don't want to be transparent and disclose the budget? That is real. Like you will run into that as a young person if you're trying to negotiate. The We are basically sharing the best practices. You can refer them to this training. You could refer them to me to have a conversation about why this might be important. But part of it is, you might say, like, I'm asking this question because I am trying to determine whether or not I can complete the work within your budget, right? Like, if you are engaging me as a contractor, I need to know what the budget is and whether I can actually do it for that amount, right? It's a very reasonable ask. I know it's not going to feel that way for folks. And then Darla asked the question about like W-9s. What is the law around W-9s? And I'll just briefly say, I mean, the W-9 form, all it is a request for a taxpayer identification number. So that could be your individual social security number. If you have a business, it could be your employer identification number. If you are undocumented, it could be your individual taxpayer identification number. Um, so the reason an organization would collect that, like our organization has a policy to set someone up as a vendor, you need a W-9. That's why we keep running into that at my organization. But really, legally, you need the W-9 if you anticipate you're going to do enough work with that contractor or vendor that would trigger your need to send them a 1099, which is documentation of their work throughout the year, and that you might have to, that they might be responsible then for paying tax on that particular income. So we are going to move into a session now about taxes and benefits. So we may be able to talk a little more about that. I am also happy to follow up more about these questions, and you'll have my contact information and Sophie's as well. So again, this just kind of summarizes, what we've talked about here today, and we thank you for your time. Appreciate you all being here. And we will move on to our next presentation without ado.
Thank you all.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jack Tate. My pronouns are they, them. And I am a part of the Youth Economic Empowerment Collective with my corporation, True Self LLC. I'm very excited to be here and just grateful that we get to have this conversation. This is going to be more of like a little relaxed environment.
And I'm Pixie. I use they, they pronouns. I'm the director of the California Homeless Youth Project. And I'm also sick, and so is my entire family. And I have a toddler next to me who you'll probably hear demanding an episode of Paw Patrol while speaking. So, like I said, like Jack was saying, it'll be a low key environment for this session.
So something we were talking about earlier was like, when you saw the title of the session, what were you hoping to learn? You know, we really want this to be a relaxed environment. We have a set of things we'd like to talk about, but if there's certain questions that people have right now, we'd love to hear them and kind of see if we address them along the way. So, um, yeah, what were you hoping to learn in this session, or some questions that you may have about the session?
Thanks, Felicia, for putting on the chat about the like what oh, I think it was accidentally just to the panelists, but what we might be doing wrong. And I think like if we are folks who are employing or supporting youth and young adult experts, I think that like definitely just being mindful and introspective, and we'll definitely have that conversation. But I was thinking on reading that as because I'm a person with lived experience. And so I think when I was navigating it that way, that I was thinking about the narrative that it is always us doing, like, right, like in that, us doing something wrong. So I think narrative is important depending on our positioning. But feel free as we're going through the conversation to drop questions. We're happy to like pivot and be flexible. And then just one thing too is that we, like Jack was saying earlier in the first session, that you will get within the week a link to the drive that we created. And so you will have documents that kind of lay this out a little bit like strategically so that you can go back to the information at any point. But we decided our faces were way too cute to have a PowerPoint up. So we're just gonna have a convo. So yes, exactly. So yeah, so we will go ahead and kind of get started with what you have. And if something comes up or we didn't address anything, please put it in the chat and we can pivot or say, "Ooh, we'll get back to you on that."
Yes, because we don't always have all the answers. Like, we definitely learn as we go along. Like, I can attest to the sticky notes, the pieces of paper that have like a lot of information, and then you misplace it, and then you're like, well, I'm going to do something wrong. So like something that I kind of wanted to go over was, if you're making any sort of income, whether you feel it is like minute, like really just file it, you know, because it helps you really build that confidence, and you are having income coming in. You are being able to prove that you have some sort of income coming in, whether that is a W-2 job that you worked very briefly, or you worked on a project and you received a 1099 form. You know, being mindful, like, I wish that I had been more mindful of that when I was experiencing homelessness and trying to get benefits while being in college, because I didn't have any income. I just had my financial aid, and I wasn't able to access things that I thought I was going to. So had I been able to prove some of my income, even if it was small, would have shown that I was doing something and could have been eligible for things that, you know, would have been beneficial during that point. Um, let's see. So like a W-2, when you receive a W-2, it is given to you by your employer, whether you are full-time or part-time. And that means that your employer is taking out your federal and state taxes. So, and that's if you live in a state that has taxes. Like, I live in Nevada, we don't have state taxes, so we only pay federal taxes. And in that W-2, you'll also see like deductions from your paycheck based on benefits you receive, which could be health insurance, life insurance, or even retirement benefits. So being mindful that you think you're going to make a certain paycheck because you're making it hourly, but taxes and things are being deducted from your W-2 form at the end. And being mindful for the year 2025, if you were paid $15,570 or more, you do need to file your taxes with your W-2 form. And then another form we're talking about is the 1099 form. So we have a 1099-K, which some of you might have received, which is a report of payment for selling goods or services online. That can be from credit, debit, stored value cards, such as gift cards, payment apps like Venmo or PayPal, and online marketplaces like Etsy. if you are self-employed outside of your federal and state taxes, you also have to pay self-employment taxes. So being mindful of that, because we think that we only see certain things on the screen, but there are other hidden things. So if you don't have somebody helping you file your taxes and you're using like a tax service like TurboTax, there's a lot of places where you can type in your questions. If you don't know something or you feel you might be doing something incorrectly, figure it out, like type your question in the search engine of the tax place that you're working with, because they might be able to tell you how to do the form. Like I know for myself, when I filed taxes, something was different from TurboTax to like Free Tax USA. And I actually was getting some sort of refund when another service told me I wasn't, just because they didn't ask all the right questions. And a reminder, if you're receiving money from friends or family as a gift or repayment for personal expenses, that should not be reported as income. You may get that form at the very end of the year from like Venmo stating, oh, this is how you spent your money, or this is the money that came in. These payments are not taxable income. So just being mindful that if you get a form and you do use your card or something for business expenses, recognizing that some of the income that you received, you don't need to report if it was from friends or family. And a caveat, even if an organization doesn't provide a Form 1099, if you received income from the organization, you need to report, you need to file that information. And then let's
Jack, there
see.
is a question in the chat.
Okay.
Basically, they're asking, Andrea saying, I've had some folks who've had their payments garnished because they owed money to the state on back taxes. Any insight on how to have conversations up front about the risk of that conversation or confiscation?
Yeah, so I know for myself, if I have an issue and I get something back from the IRS, I will immediately see about filing a revision. So before you have to owe something or something happens, look about, can I file that revision and see if somebody can look over my taxes with me and see if I missed certain deductions. Like when I first started doing this work, I didn't recognize that like the computer I did my work on when I was working on projects with nonprofits could have been deducted because I purchased it for work, or like getting deductions for like part of my phone bill because I used that predominantly for work. Like I didn't take deductions that I could have that could have lowered my tax liability and would have helped me potentially even get a refund or just not pay any taxes at all. I think sometimes like being mindful of that. Like earlier we had saw somebody said like, what if we do something wrong? Well, what if you also do something right? Look at the information that you have, figure out if there are any questions ahead of time. Because another issue I had was I didn't talk to the organization I was working for. I didn't know that I had any, I had to file taxes because I'm like, well, I'm homeless right now. So if I don't have housing and all of this money is going towards my living expenses and I'm in school, I shouldn't have to file because I don't have any money for anything. Like if it wasn't taking care of my living expenses plus my food and everything, I didn't think it had to be filed. So like kind of like what Katie was saying, like being mindful of looking at certain resources. There are things available like the Way Home America webinar, which I was totally going to bump. So I thank you for putting that in the chat. And I also kind of wanted to toss it over to Pixie because I think you've experienced some of these issues and had to have some workarounds for that as well.
Of
Oh,
course,
you're
after
cute.
I
I'm
take a bite
sorry.
of cheese, it's fine. Everything is fine. Yeah. No, I think just because like I was like trying to like go in order, just because like I think of some of the things when you're talking about like what do you talk about or like how to negotiate benefits or different things, then like we can I'm gonna go like this to benefits and like thinking about it in more of an expansive way. I was just thinking about and I'm sorry if this doesn't directly go to where you were thinking it would, but when you're talking about like self-employment tax, right? We think about like, oh, we're giving 20, $25 an hour or an instance. And I think about like how, right, where I didn't realize how much that actually amounted to, right? Which is nothing, right? So if we think about like 30% is the general number that folks give if you're being an independent contractor to hold for taxes. And so if we're giving someone $20 an hour, we're actually only giving them $6.75 an hour, right? Which is quite less than minimum wage. And so I think when we are like as somebody trying to compensate for engagement of lived experience, I think a minimum would be $60 an hour because then that actually comes out to 20, right? Because we need to think about the things that we're benefiting off of that is actually potentially keeping folks in poverty or in this like space, and how we can on up the other side kind of support that. And so the parts, and if this jumps around, I apologize, but I was just thinking one of the things that I was able to do was in the contract put in when I'm bringing someone on like professional development as like a bucket in which they can access like for free or paid for. And one of those things that we actually did is we provide tax consultation as part of their professional development. And so they actually got, I think it was 3 hours of tax consultation. So both to file and then also just to have a conversation about like for the following year. So I think about just how we can help in some of those ways, and I'll speak to more as we go on. But I know that it's a further tangent, so I'll pass back to you, Jack.
One
Yeah, of
quick
course.
question though, Pixie, hold on. Kylie's wondering, can you say that calculation again? I think it was like,
The
yeah, the calculation.
30%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So self-employment tax plus other taxes if you're operating as an independent contractor is around 30%. So the what I would normally say is that not to hire anyone for less than $60 an hour because that comes out to $20 an hour. So currently what I have seen as a normal practice is 20 to 25 dollars an hour or a session, right? Which usually, baby, hold on, please. And so that actually is only coming out to $6.75 an hour, or in engagement. Thanks, Katie.
So another form I want to talk about, 1099 NEC. This is used to report non-employee employee compensation. So you might receive this if an organization pays their contractors via direct deposit or check. Oh, of course. Yes, we can slow down a little bit. Did you want to hear something specific about the calculations again, Jace? And also, just another reminder, we are going to have like sections from each session where you can see the individual recording on some of these and the write-up or information we have, as well as the legal guide that has a very large breakdown of a lot of this tax information. And then I'm going to talk about one more form, 1099 miscellaneous. This is all other income payments that fall under this form. So anything like at least $600 in like prizes and awards, other income payments, medical and healthcare payments, or at least $10 in royalties. Some people might think, what's a royalty? I know a lot of us are very like creative. So for example, for me, like if I ever get a reimbursement for like streams on platforms for music from TuneCore, then I get a 1099 and miscellaneous document where I have to report that information, which sometimes can get a little like confusing because when you initially go to file your taxes on like a certain like tax form, like TurboTax, for example, they don't always have this front and center because not everyone's receiving this. They're usually getting the 1099K or 1099 NEC form.
I'm
Okay, so
just
it seems like people
clarifying,
do want
Jack.
to hear
I
that.
said things backwards and out loud, and so I'm just clarifying it in words in chat because sick brain. I apologize.
One
Okay,
thing I
yeah,
was
so
going to mention
Pixie.
too, Jack, I don't know if you all were going to talk about it, but I think sometimes, like, because you mentioned a bit earlier about the benefit, like, there is a benefit to filing your taxes, even these self-employment taxes, which can be really onerous. And part of it is like that rate is going towards your Medicaid or your Medicare and your Social Security. So like that's essentially what you're paying into with some of that self-employment tax. So it's also, obviously you don't want to not file your taxes and get in trouble legally, but there is, a deferred, but there is a benefit eventually. So I just also wanted to kind of highlight your mention earlier about some of the benefits of filing because yeah, it can be really rough too.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to go into more of those benefits very shortly. I wanted to provide a couple of quick examples because, like, for me, I started out as a 1099 contractor and then I formed an LLC, a limited liability company partnership. And some of the things that I've kind of learned along the way with that, like if there's a group of people that you know are doing similar work, if you have people that are all in a similar YAB or something, and you would like to possibly exercise more of your rights, having an LLC might be beneficial to you. So, like, when you are in an LLC, for me, I have an LLC partnership. So that means there's at least two people or more in the LLC. And some of the things that I've been able to do with my company, even though I'm still doing the same work, is that like I've been able to navigate my rates a little bit more, where I say, okay, like it's not just me as an individual. I am bringing this money back and filing under my business EIN on my taxes to then get a form later on, a scheduled pay form. So like for me, I'll go back to my business partner and we'll discuss, hey, like how should I be paid? Like, do you think that I should be paid at X amount at the beginning? Do you think that I should have this money come in only under my name or should we put it under the business? Like I get to have these conversations that really help me navigate and have more financial freedom because I didn't get to do that as just a contractor or a youth consultant. Um, Something that I did to really help with filing taxes, regardless if you are self employed or you own a business, is saving all your receipts, digital and physical, because those deductions that you're able to take can really change the amount that you have to pay back in taxes, or sometimes reduce them to a non existent because maybe you're also in school, or maybe you also have some small like W 2 income that you're filing as well. Like all these things really add up to a benefit to you. Um, Another thing, making your business purchases on like separate transactions from your personal expenses, because like we had mentioned before, like you might get a form at the end of the year from Venmo, PayPal, Cash App about the money that you received and the money that you spent. And if you have like a dedicated card or a dedicated account for that, it can really help you navigate things during the year when you have to pay those self-employment taxes or you are getting to ready to pay taxes at the end of the year. Um, and then something that I really love about like having this partnership is the joint effort. When I have somebody else that I could bounce ideas off of, like we talked earlier in the first session about creating a contract. Like, what does that look like? Oftentimes, if you are in this field and you are contracting with someone, you're usually given a form that you have to sign, and you don't really have any stance or ability to negotiate things, or at least you may not feel like you can. Um, when you have other people involved in this mutual effort, it can really be empowering to you to be able to navigate those things, like Pixie was mentioning about navigating for that higher rate of pay. And we're going to talk more about like getting those benefits. If you can't get higher pay, what are some things that you can negotiate? Because you deserve to be able to pay for your living expenses, to have food to eat, to have shelter. Like you are deserving of that in this work. And most people, you would not be able to have those nonprofits get the grants or the funding they do if you're not here doing the work alongside them. So really being mindful of like, this is your living. So advocating for yourself, finding that way to come together and talk with the people that are in your circle about, hey, like I'm having some confusion about my taxes, or maybe we can advocate for a resource like that in our work so that we understand how to file the taxes or have somebody look at it for us. Because it can get confusing, especially as you change or if you have multiple streams. Like if you are employed and have a W 2 and a 1099, those are separate forms. You can't file them the same way. And I've seen like friends and people in this work file their contract employment as a W 2, thinking they did it correctly and they didn't pay taxes. So then they come back later the next year and they owe taxes from the previous year and fees and fines because they didn't pay it on time. So recognizing like it can get confusing, but we're going to provide materials and information that kind of make it a little more simple because the IRS website is a lot. So I know that we were talking about benefits and we want to get into that conversation more about what does that look like for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully I won't, confuse everybody even more again. But yeah, so I think, so I was thinking about, right. So currently I have a project in which is like my position, I got my position covered by the organization, but then everything else is grant funded and is minimal. But I wanted to be able to provide something. So I wanted to kind of like give like things that I was able to think of in that like right creative way, but then also support those that I kind of brought on to make sure that there isn't this having to just piecemeal a whole bunch of things together and barely scrape by. So this is to consider when health insurance and maybe other employee benefits are unavailable through a contract. And so while some entities are limited in their formal benefit offerings due to maybe the engagement or the employment type or grant limitations, there are still alternatives to being able to negotiate benefits that you or that maybe even you can request. So this, I was going to cover like four different things, and my 3-year-old is going to complain the whole time about it. But it can be limited. It can look like position titles. It can look like skills or training certificates or certifications, engagement agreements, and then references or letters of recommendation. So I just wanted to be expansive in the idea of what we can think of as benefits. So titles, while independent, this is one of the conversations that Jack and I actually had, right? Like while an independent contractor consultant are the government-based titles that are often used, they don't fully represent the level of responsibility or impact your position might bring to an organization or an effort. So requesting the acceptance or approval to create or co-create your title can be an administrative benefit that's provided, especially that enhances your credibility and leverages future professional opportunities. So for instance, you are a youth consultant for an organization, but you are reviewing grant applications and activities to ensure lived experience engagement. You were actually a grants administrator, right? So I think that, and this is actually like something that like Jack had talked about, that their experience was, is that they were actually doing the same efforts as as a grants administrator, but just had youth consultant on like their contract. But being able to put actually on your resume or CV, curriculum vitae, that you were a grants administrator actually represents what you did. So sometimes that can be a benefit to an organization. Um, and then, yeah, exactly. Phoebe is like often, right? Like youth advisory board members are project managers. Absolutely. And so definitely being able, or even like program coordinators, those kinds of things that really you can align titles to no baby. I'm not going to stop talking. I'm in a meeting. And so you depending on what trajectory that you're wanting, you can make sure that the title aligns because maybe project manager isn't in the alignment of what you want to do in the future. So maybe you want something that aligns more that really does show what you are doing and what you're going to do.
And may I add something to that?
Yes, of course.
And like, okay, say you can't get that formal title on a document or on a website. Ask your supervisor, would you be able to say that this is my position when somebody calls you for, a recommendation or, to get that employment or the other work that you're trying to do? Because that is what you did, So like, I noticed like some of the times, like when I've applied for certain things and I had the words youth consultant on there because that's what was told I was, I didn't seem as competitive for certain positions or people passed me up thinking I didn't have the experience. But I had so much more experience. I was doing the work of several people while also having that lived experience of homelessness, while also trying to navigate these things in real time that we were trying to do with the project. So like being mindful of like, hey, like if your supervisor or the person that's navigating the project isn't willing to do these things for you, asking yourself, like, is this in alignment with what I'm doing? And how can I really advocate for myself and others in this space? Because like the more that we disrupt the system, the more that we can actually do and empower for ourselves. Like I know when I started doing some of this work, I wasn't allowed to get paid before I did the service. But I've been able to navigate more of those contracts now where I can get paid before I do the service. And that helps me have the ease and the relaxation of I can focus on this work because my bills are paid, because I can eat, because I have the things that I need. And like that should just be like common sense in this work. If you are working with people with lived experience, if you're working with people that need that assistance, have these things available for them. Help them get those positions. Help them get the payment for the work that they're doing. If you're not going to do it for them, find a way to make that possible.
Exactly. And so on that trajectory, kind of going into some other considerations that can be offered or requested. So engagement agreements. So kind of one of the examples I'd use about the professional development is getting a tax consultant, but maybe there's something else. I think one of the big things that has been really important to me is like, I think we absolutely need, right? Like I like youth accountability bodies, right? Not just action, but just like making sure that organizations are doing what they need to do and staying grounded always. But I think like that shouldn't have to be your only option. If you thrive in that, this is what you want and this is what you want to stay in, great. And is there other places in which your voice would be beneficial or your experience? And what things do you need to get there? So I think being able to be curious about like what are those things and how can we support you as we're benefiting from your expertise, we want you to be able to benefit from your expertise. So I think can you offer that hours or can be used towards something else, whether that is so one of my folks wanted more data visualization experience, so I got them hours getting one-on-one development in that, or how to utilize data narratives and social math, right? Is it that, or do you want more research experience, those kinds of things, and being able to work that in because ultimately we still benefit from as like organizations from those professional developments, but so does the young people beyond our organization. Another is education stipends or hours allocations, is that you actually say in the contract, you say $10, not $10, 10 hours a week. If they are going back to school or those kinds of things, allowing 2 hours of that to actually be put towards school, because again, the things that might be being learned or gained will benefit both. So being able to be flexible about what is accomplished within the hours that are allocated to a person. And then same thing, maybe it's not education, maybe it is the professional development. Again, being able to set aside hours not towards maybe a direct task, but this indirect task that benefits things. An additional one is like a healthcare stipend. Again, like that whole kind of $60 thing is like we don't realize all the things that we might take for granted to a full-time or like a covered employment of like the taxes are already taken out. We get discounts towards our healthcare, or maybe, you get a stipend for your home office or whatever. And so I think one of the things we had worked in is like mental health sometimes isn't paid or fully covered. And so we actually had a healthcare stipend so that they could access therapy more often, or they could, be able to pay for their medication so they didn't, all of those things. And so those are some considerations. Maybe you allow per contract a lump sum that they can pull out each time for a healthcare stipend. So I think about those things that can be written into contracts or utilized as benefits that are beyond this like traditional thought. The final two are things that just offered based on our connection. So one of them is like skills or training certifications. Are there things that are utilized or learned during the time within the organization or project that can be put into a certificate, right? I think about how often maybe a job interview or application asks, what kind of certifications do you have? You spent 2 years at this organization learning data visualization, but you didn't take a $300 or $3,000 course, but you have the same skills. So being able to like say from your organization received a certification in basic data visualization training, those things go really far, right? And we sometimes forget about the power that a name of an organization can have, and just really having reference of the skills that folks do have. And maybe folks already have that, but don't have, again, that formalized training. Maybe you can offer that because, again, you're benefiting from it. And then the final one is just like, yeah, references and letters of recommendation. That also goes far, and always being willing to do that. Because again, these applications are different things are asking, oh, your previous supervisor, and if you're an independent contractor, what does that look like? So being able to kind of have something to rely back on. And then Jack, and I wanted to pivot it back to you before we kind of go into considerations, further considerations about like employment type and
Yeah, I also wanted to add another thing, like an experience that I had, doing projects and having them periodically or getting paid, not in the same traditional hourly wage where you get paid at maybe once a month or every 2 weeks. Having somebody also vouch for your employment history. I know, like for Katie, I was able to email Katie and say, "Hey, like my housing wants to know like what's going on or how I'm getting paid. Can you provide something for that?" That was really beneficial to me because it allowed me to keep my housing. It allowed me to show that I am working, even if it is non-traditional. I am doing something and I have these things lined up. So like also sometimes thinking out of the box, like if you need something or you might need it in the future, kind of saying, hey, can I ask you this question? Would this be something you would be willing to do for me if this, arises? Like just finding ways to open up that communication because if for me personally, like sometimes the money aspect is very difficult to navigate because there's so many things set in stone in the back end that the person you're working with is not going to be able to navigate that for you. Um, However, these other things, these other benefits are things that should be navigatable. So being able to bring these things to people's awareness so that you can have them in the future is important. Um, so like this is not all the things that you can advocate for, but this is just a very small list. Um,
that totally made me think about as we like click to the next thing, Jack, is also can like it's when Katie was actually mentioning earlier about like being able to share the budget, maybe sometimes people don't, is like how could we also just be creative about the number, right? So I like remember being offered like knowing that I have a master's degree, and I only say that because of all of the school debt that comes with it, right? But like knowing that all of the skills that they'll be getting, all of that, they're like, sorry, our budget says, $20 an hour for, 15 hours a week. And I'm like, well, no. But like, what if, for all the things that you're getting, what about $30 an hour at 10 hours a week, right? So thinking about how can we also just be like, okay, your budget says you only have this much per month. Okay, then let's talk about what is that actually applicable for both of us that you will still be getting support, and then I'll also be getting paid a reasonable wage. So I think about being able to be more curious and creative within those kind of like budget allotments.
um, yeah, so we had just a few quick considerations. I mean, we can go to them together. Start off with like number one. Some states assume you are an employee by default, not a contractor. The organization paying you must prove otherwise, and this is true for states like California, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Illinois, Colorado, and Hawaii. What this means for you is if you're paid hourly, given a schedule, trained or supervised, you are likely an employee, even if someone calls you a consultant or pays you a stipend.
And these are just like definitely considerations to like look into when you're building your contracts or, when it gets to tax pieces. So the second notice is if you are under 18, contractor pay is actually usually a red flag. So most states actually restrict or prohibit minors from being independent contractors. So they have to actually require work permits, parental consent, and hour limits. And then there's an expectation of minors who are paid to be treated as employees. So it's important that if you're being paid as a contractor, that it does not override child labor laws. And then sometimes you can't like legally be entered into contracts at all. So if you're under 18, being paid as an employee is usually safer and more legal than being paid as a contractor. That I'll say the next thing after number three, Jack.
Yeah. Another thing, stipends are still income. So a stipend is money you earned. It can affect your taxes and your benefits, and it does not automatically mean you are a contractor. In some states, regular stipends for advisory boards can still trigger employee status. especially if attendance is required, meetings are ongoing, or the work is central to the organization's mission.
And one of the benefits that like this made me think of is that one of the things that I am able to do, because I'm also one of those people that has to expend the funds and get reimbursed, and make sure that they try not to make that as a compensation for me, is that I submit the receipts of direct payment. So I use Cash App, Venmo, all of those things. Submit the receipts, but I redact the username. So it does not have the image, it doesn't have the at. So it shows that there has been expenditure of funds. There is always the like what. So I have my organization on there and then uh, youth expertise compensation and then the date or the event. And so then it shows like what is it, is going somewhere, but that it actually doesn't get attached to a young person. So that way it doesn't impact these benefits, especially if it's like one time or non-ongoing or above, like I like for it to not impact. That's another benefit that can be offered while still being able to show receipts so that you can get reimbursed. Um, also, hourly peer mentorship or outreach work almost always means that you're an employee. So across states, this pattern is very consistent. So if you're paid by the hour, which like $15 an hour or such, you're scheduled for weekly shifts, so 15 to 20 hours. You are trained and supervised, or you're doing outreach, mentorship, or drop-in center work, you're almost always considered an employee and not a contractor. And so again, these are just things when we're entering into those contracts.
Another consideration is paperwork should exist. So red flags, those include being paid cash with no records, no tax form, whether that's a W-2 or a 1099 form, being told paperwork will come later, or being told you must be a contractor to get paid. Lack of paperwork protects the organization, not you. So if you're getting paid something, you're going to have to report that income. And if you don't keep some sort of backup for yourself, because you never know, like things do happen, make sure that you kind of keep track of, okay, these are the hours I worked, or this is what I've gotten paid. Or if you have a contract, you keep that in a safe space so that you know what those terms and agreements were. Or anything, like even if it's an email, if it's an email contract that says you are going to get paid like this, save that email. Because you never know when you're going to need that email, because you might get one thing from somebody, but when you receive your pay or different things, it might be completely different, and you need to be able to advocate for that.
Absolutely. And one thing that you can do when it's connected to contracts as well, again, about like accessibility or benefit, is create at the top, like have the official contractor of the things, but then have at the top is the like a TLDR that identifies what does this contract include, what does it mean, and then have it directly linked to the section in the contract that explains that in its legal jargon, right? So I think sometimes it can get overwhelming. So being able to say, here's what's included, but then also be able to reference it rather than what, like when you go to certain places, they're like, oh yeah, you're signing this thing that's 3 pages, but all it says is that we won't, forward your information. No, like actually be able to kind of reference what that means. And then leaning into what Jack had said earlier about like the getting paid can affect benefits and taxes, is so it doesn't getting paid does not automatically mean that you lose benefits, but income also like must always be reported. So benefits that can be affected by income are like SSI and SSDI, food assistance or SNAP, housing assistance, and Medicaid. So some things that are kind of important when considering that are smaller one-time payments may have limited impact or none at all. So some programs allow deductions or exclusions, and then problems usually happen when income is not reported or reported late. So again, it's not always a limitation, but it should be at the upfront. So again, that we're not having to do this like back pay. The system benefits being able to hold our money for free, but if we are a day late, they want to charge us. Um, and then the piece that comes, there's always this like middle ground that like make too much for some things, but not enough to live, right? So there's like something called the sudden drop in benefits when income increases is called like a benefit cliff, right? So not making enough to pay for it yourself, but then making too much to be able to get a benefit.
And also being mindful, like say you might be getting paid a larger lump sum for a contract, maybe advocating to get paid in increments, if that could be an issue for your benefits. So instead of getting paid $1,000 at one time, maybe being able to break it up over a few $100s over a few weeks or over a few months, depending on what's necessary. Those things should be able to be negotiated or talked about because you are a contractor in this space. And then, like we had mentioned before, if taxes are not taken out, you may owe. So it's important that if you don't see that reported on any sort of form, if you don't have a monthly or a biweekly or every 2 week paycheck, and you don't see that things are being taken out, then you may owe. So, rule of thumb, if no taxes are withheld, try to save about 20 to 30% of what you are paid.
And so kind of just like summarizing all of this about like what kind of to say before you are asked to say before, oh my goodness, what to ask before you say yes. It's you can ask like, will I be paid as an employee or as a contractor? Will I receive a W-2 or 1099? How might this affect my benefits? Who can help me if I have questions about taxes or benefits? Some of these, like some of the rules across the state might vary by like age or how you're paid. But if something feels confusing, rushed, or informal, like I was saying it earlier, is like embrace your inner toddler and ask why, and or just like ask questions because I think that that's an important time also for the organizations to be introspective about why. But it's also part of protecting yourself.
Thank you for joining us and see now. If you have any questions, if there's anything you'd like us to know, drop in the chat. We'd love to talk and just hear what y'all are thinking.
Yeah, thank you both so much for this presentation, Jack and Pixie. We really appreciate it. And the presenters from the first session and this session, Jack and Pixie, we're going to hang around for the next 15 minutes. There's going to be a little break and pause. I'm going to stop the recording for a minute and just say